He didn't move. The old gorilla lay on his side at the edge of the tree line, one arm stretched out in front of him, fingers curled loosely against the dry grass. His chest rose and fell, slowly, unevenly, like something winding down. The afternoon light was flat and pale. The air barely moved. The hyenas had been there for a while, 3 of them, maybe 20 feet back, not pacing, not rushing, just standing, reading the situation the way they always do, carefully, without urgency. One sat low on its haunches, nose working, ears forward. The others stayed slightly behind. They weren't ready to commit, not yet. That's not how they work. The closest one took a step, one step, then stopped. It tilted its head, watching the gorilla's side for any change in breathing, any muscle twitch, any signal that would tell it what it needed to know. There was nothing, just that slow, uneven rise and fall. The hyena pulled its ears back slightly and held its ground. He was old, that much was visible even from a distance. The silver across his back had gone pale and patchy. The thick mass of his shoulders, which would have once carried an almost impossible weight, looked sunken now, like the frame was still there but something underneath had quietly given way. His face was turned slightly toward the ground. One eye was open, barely, the other pressed against the dirt. Nobody who saw him would have called him dangerous, that was the truth of it. A second hyena moved around to his left, keeping wide, circling slow. It wasn't coordinating with the others in any conscious way. This was just instinct, just the way they read space and angles without thinking about it. It paused when it got to roughly his 7 o'clock position, sniffed, looked at the other one. Still no reaction from the gorilla. The first one stepped closer. 3 feet this time, maybe 4. It lowered its head and extended its nose, pulling in whatever the air would give it. The smell of an animal, healthy or not, strong or fading, tells a hyena almost everything. And whatever it was reading in that moment, it didn't immediately step forward again. It stopped, stood there. Then the gorilla blinked, slow, just once. The eye that was open caught the light for a half second, then went still again. His breathing didn't change, his body didn't move. But that blink, that single quiet signal, seemed to land differently than silence would have. The hyena closest to him took one short step back. Not retreat, just a recalibration. They were still watching. Minutes passed. The sun moved. A bird called somewhere in the brush behind them and then went quiet. The gorilla's breathing continued at that same uneven pace, and the hyenas stayed in their loose arrangement around him, not closing the distance, not backing off, just holding. There was no question about their advantage, 3 against 1, and that one couldn't stand. In almost any situation that unfolds that way in the wild, the outcome follows a predictable line. You don't need to think too hard about it. The math is simple. But they weren't moving. The lead hyena circled a few steps to the right, keeping its eyes fixed forward. It was testing the perimeter without committing to it. There's a difference between those two things, and hyenas understand that difference better than most. Commitment costs something. A bite from an animal that still has anything left in it, even a fraction, can break a jaw, dislocate a shoulder, end a hunt permanently. They know this without knowing they know it, so they waited. The wind shifted, just slightly, a small change in direction that brought the gorilla's scent toward them in a different way. The lead hyena stopped moving. Its nose went up. The 2 behind it picked up the change as well. For a moment, all 3 were still. Then one of them made a short sound, low, almost conversational, and took 2 steps back. Nothing had happened. The gorilla hadn't moved, hadn't made a sound, hadn't shown his teeth or raised his head or done anything that would register as a threat to anyone watching. He was still lying there, breathing slow, one hand pressed against the dry grass. But the hyena had stepped back, and the other 2, without any visible signal passing between them, had stilled. Something about him didn't feel right to them. The gorilla exhaled. It wasn't a growl. It wasn't a warning. It was just breath leaving his body. Deep, slow, from somewhere in his chest. A low, resonant sound that rolled outward and settled into the grass and the air around it. Not aggressive, not even intentional. Just the sound of a large animal still breathing. The hyenas heard it. The one closest to him pulled back another step and turned its head slightly to the side. Not looking away, that's a different movement, a submission. This was something else. A pause, a recalculation. Its ears shifted position twice in 3 seconds, reading some frequency the sound had carried that didn't register as threat, but didn't register as nothing, either. Time passed, the kind of time that stretches. In the wild, silence isn't empty. It's full of information that moves slowly, that accumulates rather than announces itself. Every second that the hyenas didn't move was a second of data. Every second the gorilla didn't respond was data back. They were reading each other without either of them choosing to. The 2 in the back began to pace, not urgently, but that low side-to-side movement that happens when a predator is engaged but uncertain, when the body wants to act and the instinct says wait. One of them circled wide again, expanding the perimeter, checking angles, found nothing new, came back to where it started. They had every advantage, and they weren't taking it. That's the part that doesn't fit any simple explanation. It wasn't fear exactly. Hyenas don't frighten easily, and nothing the gorilla had done would qualify as frightening. He hadn't charged. He hadn't bluffed. He was lying on the ground with his eyes barely open, and his breathing shallow and unsteady. By every visible measure, the situation was theirs. But animals don't only read visible measures. They read the space around a body, the weight of it, the history carried in a scent, in the way a chest expands, in the specific register of a sound made without intention. Somewhere in all of that, the gorilla was communicating something he wasn't trying to communicate, and whatever that signal was, the hyenas were receiving it. The lead one moved forward again, 3 steps, deliberate, head low. The gorilla's breathing stayed even. His hand didn't move. His eyes, still barely open, caught nothing. The hyena stopped, right at the edge of what would have been the point of no return, and stood there. 1 second, 2, no spin, no retreat, just a quiet reversal, weight shifting to the back legs, a slow backward step, then another. The 2 behind it didn't need to be told anything. They adjusted. The circle that had been tightening began, almost imperceptibly, to loosen. The gorilla exhaled again, slower this time. He shifted, just barely, just enough. One shoulder pressed slightly deeper into the ground, his arm moving an inch or two, his body settling into a slightly different position. That was all. He didn't lift his head. He didn't make a sound. He just moved the way something moves when it hasn't stopped existing. And that was enough. The hyenas held for another long moment. The leader looked at him once more, a long flat look with nothing theatrical about it, and then turned its head away. Not submission, just a decision. The cost-benefit had landed somewhere they didn't like, for reasons that don't translate into language but were fully real. They began to pull back, slowly, no hurry, pacing out the same careful distance they'd paced in. The last one paused for a second at the outer edge, and looked back once. The gorilla hadn't moved again, still there, still breathing. It turned and walked. He didn't fight. He didn't have to. The grass was quiet. The air was flat and still again. Somewhere behind the tree line, a branch shifted under the weight of something passing through, and then that sound faded too. The gorilla lay where he was, breathing, still breathing. The light changed as the afternoon moved on. Longer shadows, cooler air coming in from the east. The gorilla hadn't moved much, a slight shift in position once, his hand dragging a few inches through the dirt, as if he was testing whether he could. He could, barely. He wasn't recovering. That wasn't what this was. But he was still there, still present in the way that mattered, in the only way that matters in a place like that. Breathing in, breathing out, taking up space, continuing. It doesn't look like anything from a distance. It doesn't look like survival. It looks like an old animal lying on the ground at the edge of a tree line, doing very little. That's what survival often looks like. No rescue came. There was no moment of reversal, no sudden return of strength. His body remained what it was, worn down, carrying decades of weight, not built for what came next, so much as built for what had already passed. A silverback carries the record of everything he's survived in the structure of him, in the way he settles into stillness, in the specific gravity of his presence, even when that presence is reduced to its minimum. Something in that gravity had spoken to the hyenas, not words, not intention, just physics, the physics of what he still was. They had the numbers, the energy, the angles. They had every reason to finish what the situation had offered them. And they had chosen, without choosing, not to. That choice wasn't mercy. Animals don't deal in mercy. It was risk assessment. Ancient, wordless, operating far below anything deliberate, and somewhere in that calculation, he had still registered as a cost they weren't willing to pay. He exhaled slowly in the cooling air. His eye, barely open, caught the change in light. In the wild, survival isn't always about strength. Sometimes it's about what others decide not to do.